Hi, good evening and welcome once again to the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon show. We also coming to you live on YouTube. You could also get it there on TBN, Daybreak News. Wherever you are, once say good night, good morning. I also would like to say be very careful on the road. It's so crazy out there tonight. Uh, Tonight we are going to talk about the budget. We have with us in the studio and my co-host Freddie Kissoon in a very short while. We'll introduce him. No stranger to Guyana, a former guest right on our program here, has a bundle of knowledge and has been studying the local situation and of course is qualified. But before we get started, a little bit of things around the home that we should be settled first. You should know on Friday I never realized that we had such a good following. It was a lot of people that reached out to us afterwards of what seems to be a storm in a teacup. I wanted to say to you that the first thing that Gildarie does not have a constituency. I don't really care about the votes that people think that we're looking for. This show is not about that. We are concerned Guyanese. I am a concerned Guyanese. I want to see this country. I want to see my kids in a place, a very good place. I believe that we are ready to really launch ourselves into becoming probably the top country in the world. I could dream about that. People are going to agree to disagree. Freddie Kissoon is one is an academic. Gildarie is a reporter. And any show that is worth its salt, we should never agree with each other at all times. There is going to be disagreements, and those disagreements are going to be very passionate. And I, for one, and Freddie Kissoon, for one, I know that we're going to be disagreeing with each other from time to time on topics that is involved in this country when it comes to the matters involved in issues that has to do with the development of this country. I don't have time to waste. The people's business is very important to me. My business is important to me. As we move forward, we will be discussing the people business. So a lot of folks would have been reaching out to us. I'm back. I didn't go anywhere. I had business to attend to. So I took some time off. I'm back. So we're going to attend to the people business. There's a budget. It was read out. The budget speech was read on Monday. So we're going to be discussing that tonight, and let's see where it goes from here. Welcome, co-host Freddie Kissoon. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Leonard. Different time zones in the world. So as Gildarie usually say, good evening, good morning, good night, good afternoon. Our guest this evening need no introduction because he was here already, sitting in the same chair with the Minister of State within the Ministry of Public Works. He has been a prolific analyst. His analysis has been prolifically outpouring in the newspapers. He is financial analyst, Joel Bhagwandin. Before I pose any question to Joel, there's something that Joel and I have been discussing for months now. And as someone who's been in the media a long time, I find it unacceptable. I hope after what I'm about to say, there could be third parties intervening and bringing a resolution to this issue. If you pick up the 4 dailies the past few months and you read Joel Bhagwandin's analysis, I found his statistical comparison of the performance statistical, because he was using Bank of Guyana statistics between before 2015 and after 2020, and I did a column on it. You read this man's reply to his critics, and you're seeing an academic presentation from which you could learn. Yet Joel said to me, his letters are not carried in the Kaicho News. Now that is factual. You do not see Joel Bhagwandin's analyses in the Kaicho, and there sometimes he told me his pieces are not carried in the Starbuck News. So I have been with the Kaicho News since its foundation, And I know the policy of any newspaper is even to entertain letters criticizing the very newspapers. And then the newspapers could choose to say the person have their say, or there could be an editorial note. But some third party has to intervene. I don't think Joel would want to engage Mr. Glenlal. I think he should and say to him, look, my analyses are not being carried, and he can quote me as saying, we discussed this on the program. Whatever is going on, newspapers have to present 3, 4, 5 sides of a story, but most of all, the newspaper have to give people their right to reply, their right to offer their opinions, except in 2 circumstances. They cannot be scatological, they cannot be scurrilous. Papers have a way of presenting itself, and you cannot be libelous. A paper could be ruined for that. So, outside of those 2 things, outside of those 2 constraints, newspaper, as a matter of nature, have to give people their say. And I can't understand why, for almost a year, Joel Bhagwandin's academic, and I would say brilliant analysis from which young people can learn. I read one of that man's comparison of pre-2015 and post-2015, how much balance of payments or what it was like before 2015 and what it was like after 2020. Those kinds of things university students can learn from. Before I hand over to Gildarie for the first question, can we bring a resolution to this thing with Joel Bhagwandin and Kaicho News? It strikes at the heart of freedom of the press and the right to your opinion. Leonard, budget time?
Thank you very much, Freddie. Just before we go, I have my own view with that. I believe that newspapers, the traditional forms of media, they're going through the door. If they don't start adopting and understanding that the reality, social media, you have to do a mixture, maybe a hybrid kind of way. You are not going to exist anymore because people with your just your phone alone, Freddie Kissoon, you have to understand that the people needs and the way that people operate when it comes to news and other things. So Joel don't have to worry. Joel got 101 ways that he could probably transmit his information. Joel, back to the people's business. Budget 2023. What is there in budget 2023 for the poor people of Guyana?
Leonard, if I may, good evening, viewers, and thank you, Leonard and Freddie, for having me here. Again, before I get to the question, since Freddie raised the topic, let me take a minute to give a quick background to the Kaicho News issue. There's a background to that. Kaicho News used to always, before anybody knew anything about who is a Joel Bhagwandin, I've been writing and publishing for the past 6 years. And they've always carried my letters. And since with the emergence of oil and gas, and I've been actively contributing to, oil and gas is a very contentious, has some very contentious issues from so many experts, and that particular newspaper has a position, has an agenda, and I've been very strong, very, very vibrant in terms of my work, my analytic work, my contribution to the public debate as regards that sector. And I would have published a cost-benefit analysis I did on the feasibility of the gas to shore project, and the Guyana Chronicle carried it, and Glenlal wrote up a big article about me. He went to talk about me, and he talked about me in the same sentence with Brassington and the vice president and Dr. Ashley Singh. All these put us in a category. I thought that was a compliment for me.
You felt good?
Of course.
Okay.
So so that's where it started, and then he started to carry some critics in his paper, and he invited me. He invited me to come on his show, which I did. I went on his show to speak about the very thing, and he sought to. His intention was to embarrass me on the show. but I think he underestimated how that would have turned out, and it didn't turn out nice in his favor, you know. And so that is the background. And since that situation, I've done programs on Kaicho Radio and so before. Since that situation, he's never published anything I write in oil and gas. Look, the other day, I'm talking to the guy now, published a criticism of one of my analysis, and I respond to it. I
That's
spoke
the guy
to the
named
guy.
Paris.
Yeah, the guy reached out to me. We spoke. We had a lengthy discussion, and he said, I don't know if the mainstream media is gonna publish this thing. I said, listen, I agree with some of the things you say. It is still flawed because you don't have the data, but I want the people to be able to see this exchange, and I respond to it. And I send his letter as well as my response to all of the editors. Chronicle published both. I think I didn't see Times publish it as yet. Kaicho News published the guy's own alone. I didn't publish my response.
No, man, that cannot be.
Right? But of course, the bottom line is there is a background to that. And
what about Stabrook? What about Stabrook?
Stabrook carried the debate between myself and Elson Lowe. And the last response I did to Elson Lowe, which he didn't like, Stabrook didn't carry it. But Times carried part of it.
All right, budget 2023,
Yeah.
the people's business. Let's get that.
So, yes, your question.
Is this budget? According to our figures, 41% increase over the 2022 budget. It's 781, and the other one was 500 something billion dollars. What is it? What is in this budget for poor people that they could smile about?
Okay.
We would have had inflation. Talking that in context of the inflation and so on, and of course we lead in the Caribbean in terms of growth. Let's hear from you, sir.
All right, so let's put the budget within a contextual framework. A budget is not an ad hoc process. Somebody don't just wake up and say, okay, we're going to build a bridge across the river, or we're going to cut a 4-lane road to connect another access route to Georgetown and connect East Bank and East Coast and Mahika and all these places. Planning and building a country doesn't happen like that. Building a country, lifting people out of poverty, creating prosperity in a sustainable manner, development in a sustainable manner, is a long-term process, and it requires a lot of hard work, dedication, commitment, and it also requires you having to navigate many, many challenges. But in building a country is absolutely no different from building a company from scratch. And it is also no different in growing a household, starting a family, from the time you leave school to start on your own, to get a job and to build and to work and to educate. There is no difference. And I want to explain this budget within these various contexts so that people could relate, right? The budget process under this government, all of the programs that we're seeing being executed, they are not new programs. They've been conceptualized 3 decades ago in something called the National Development Strategy, which started the planning stage in 1994 and completed in 1996. That document is 365 pages, and anybody could go right now on the internet and Google National Development Strategy for Guyana.pdf. You will find this document, and if you peruse this document, every single road that is being built, including a hotel, including a new airport, every single thing, including a new city that the president is pioneering up the highway, every single one of that is in that strategy. I read today the president in one of the media houses talk about looking at feasibility for reintroducing rail system. I would have spoken about that in a document, a presentation I did just before the elections, very comprehensive about the topic was the geopolitical importance of Guyana and proposals for taking the country forward, how we should position the country at a regional level, integrate it into South America. I did a paper on that before this government was elected in office in 2020, and I can say without exaggerating, and this is also on the internet, that everything that is in that document, the government is proceeding with and doing exactly that in terms of education, in terms of the geopolitical positioning, the regional positioning of the country, regional energy security agenda, food security agenda. The reintroduction of a railway network is also in that 1996 document where it proposed the feasibility to look at this. So this is a long-term process to build this country, where the process began by first taking us out of bankruptcy. And when a country is bankrupt, it means everybody virtually is living in poverty. That is why so many people left this country, because there were lack of opportunities. And you would know, all of us know, Guyana is a small society. The richest conglomerate in this country, the richest Guyanese conglomerate, which is a second or third generation company, there are a few of them. Those people came from poverty. They start from ground zero. A few of them, I don't want to call names, but we know, Guyanese know who those rich companies are. So that is the context in which we have to look at the budget. And I want to speak to, in responding to the question, to some of the criticisms of the budget. In particular, there are concerns from Guyanese, and there are criticisms from the opposition. For example, the opposition leader said that there is nothing in this budget for the people. There is nothing for cost of living. There is nothing for the manufacturing sector. And of course, there are concerns in terms of the allocation in the budget towards social welfare programs, such as pensions, such as, people think that we could get more. But it's a process, and we have to do this in a sustainable framework, and we got to understand how to do this sustainably. So let's look at the numbers. So the budget, let me speak to, firstly, the social welfare programs, right? So this year's budget is a whopping 782 billion, representing a 41% increase over last year. 50% of the budget expenditure are towards recurrent expenditure. Current expenditure meaning employment costs, servicing debt, procuring goods and so on, procuring goods and services to run the ministries, day-to-day expenses to run the public sector, including paying wages, including servicing the debt of the country and paying and the interest on loans and so on, borrowed by the country. Then the other 50% is allocated towards capital expenditure. That is the big
Building
projects,
of the roads,
the infrastructure,
right,
investing in agriculture, creating new industries, and so on. So it is on the capital side is investment for the future, for the people to benefit, which would also lift people out of poverty. So let's look at the social numbers. Of the entire budget, 782 billion, 391 billion is the current expenditure, which include the interest on loans, the service loans, right? Of that amount, employment costs to pay public servants accounts for 28%. That is $105 billion. $105 billion to pay wages and salaries to the public servants. The interest expense accounts for about 3.5% of the current expenditure, not the total budget, the current expenditure. 30% is debt service, is the service debt. So that's 61.5% of the current expenditure. Then the allocation for social welfare, things like the cash grant to the school children, the pension increases and so on, public assistance, that account for another 10%. So you have 71.5% of the current expenditure of the budget are to cater for wages, to cater for servicing debt, social welfare, and then the other 30% or 29% is to run the ministry. So the deficit now The other source of financing, which is from the Natural Resource Fund and some amount of borrowing and from the carbon credit, is to build the country. So we got to understand, yes, the mistake that a lot of oil countries did, and especially within the region, is they go on to increase current expenditure significantly.
Pay people more, you mean?
Yeah.
Among other things.
Yeah. Increase wages, spend heavily on social welfare.
Yeah.
They increase that heavily at the beginning, and what happened?
The infrastructure lag behind.
Oil price is always volatile. Today it's at $100. Tomorrow it's at $50.
That happened to Trinidad.
Right? It's
Venezuela too.
That happened to Trinidad.
So when you have an oil market crash, or if we have a geopolitical tension in the region, we have a brewing border issue, or whatever the case is, and you know, the worst case happens, you can't sustain the increases that is aside from it being inflationary too. We ain't talk about inflationary, but we're just talking about its sustainability. If we just spend so much more on the current expenditure side, right? Imagine if you can't sustain it. You don't have the money to sustain another 2-3 years because of some crisis. Something happened, right? Which has happened. What do you think can happen when you tell people we can't pay you?
Joel,
You're creating the recipe for disaster.
Can I get your thoughts on this? Overall, I would say I'm in support of the budget, but I would also like to speak on things that are close to my mind that I would like the budget, that I would have liked to see in the budget. You could never get everything in the budget, but there are things that I would have liked to see in the budget. I can't accept social security assistance moving from 14,000 to 16,000. It should have been more than that, Joel.
Correct. So that is what I'm talking about. It should have. I don't disagree that it should not have been more.
2,000 more for increased public assistance from 14,000 monthly to 16,000.
Freddie,
I think that's a mistake.
I want you to ask this question back when I'm finished. Yeah. There is a ministry.
On the program.
You have to look at the budget holistically. So hear me out, right? I went through the 50% of the expenses, right? Don't bring back money into the system. That is spent on it doesn't. Investment creates sustainability and create wealth. That is on the capital side. So if you don't build out the capital side, you can't sustain paying the bills.
Yeah, exactly. You can't
sustain paying the bills.
You can't be paying a whole bunch of salaries.
So you can't have substantial increases if you can't sustain it. You have to create that framework. So all this infrastructure, the road that we're building, the bridges that we're building, we have to build them now for more than one reasons. The first reason that I want to emphasize is that these infrastructure, these developments, supposed to happen since 15 years ago. Since 15 years ago, we're supposed to already have a bridge, a new bridge across the Demerara River. We're supposed to already have a brand new airport. We're supposed to already have all these roads. And I don't want to go into the reason why that didn't happen. It has to do with the challenges, the political
challenges.
But
you think that thing should have been more than a $2,000 increase?
Yeah, but could we afford it now? If you don't have
why
the money
we can't
to do
afford
it now?
to give
So let me answer the
assistance.
question. So you gotta allow me to answer the question,
sure.
Right? Public assistance is something that you have to sustain forever. But where does the money come from? Where does the money don't come from the sky. The money comes from somewhere. So that is why you gotta build the road to open up 1,000 acres of land, to build 25,000 houses, to house 25,000 households, new family. In that process, you open up new land for commercial development, industrial development. Right now in my company, from 2020 to now, I would have processed more than about 50 proposals, let's say conservatively 100 investment proposals. Those investments are for local investors, diaspora investors, and it amounts to billions of dollars that are sitting in some government agency. You know what they're asking for? They're asking for land to develop. We don't have land. There is land, but there's no availability of land because we have to develop new land. So we have to invest. You know what these investment will translate to? It will translate to creating jobs, creating employment, paying taxes. And these are investment across all sectors. Investment proposals for agro-processing facilities, investment in the agriculture sector, in production, increasing agriculture production, hemp, in investment proposal for warehousing facility to build warehousing infrastructure, batch making plants, cement factory, manufacturing type businesses, glass factory. These are massive investments that I have processed and I know about because I dealt with them. Hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars in investment that will create hundreds of employment, thousands of employment, direct employment, that will then sustain direct employment. We got to create employment for our students when they graduate from secondary school. If we don't open up the land, where are we going to put those children coming out from school? If we don't build the road to create new industries, where our university graduates are going to go? We're going to have graduates and we can't retain them. We don't have job for them. So you have to invest in creating industry, in creating enterprise. You have to have the framework so that businesses and investment could be secured and businesses could grow and investment could grow to create employment. In creating employment, you pay taxes. Social welfare is funded from taxes. We came from a system. The question that you're asking, we came the pre-1992 period when we were a socialist, centrally command economy. More than 80% of the country was controlled. The productive sectors of the economy was controlled by the state on the LFS Barnum. What did that lead to? It led to bankruptcy after 28 years. After 3 decades, that policy where you're spending on social welfare, you can't sustain it because 10% of the economy is driven by private enterprise, and 90% of the economy is controlled by the state. Now, in this capitalist system, mixed economy system, you have the reverse. You have 90% private enterprise, private sector, and 10% government. Government still involved in some aspect of business, Kaisuku and so on. So that is what has to sustain the social welfare.
Joel,
so if you want to grow that, you have to invest in the framework to enable that to grow so that we could collect more taxes. And the other thing is, we don't need 10 bridges. We don't need 10 gas plants. So at some point, when we get these major projects off, the gas to shore project, the bridge, build out the road infrastructure, create a new industry, build a deep water harbor. We don't have to build more of that. So what will happen at some point over the next 15 years, you have that money, that cash flow now is going to free up. It's just like running a business and planning the future to invest, right? And if you look at, I can give you an example now with a company, DDL. DDL is a public company, so I could talk about it. If you look at DDL balance sheet, for the past perhaps 10, 15 years, they were financed by a lot of borrowing. So their growth was based on leveraging their assets, borrowing against the business, right? The assets of the business. And so when you have loans to pay, it limits your capacity to invest into new ventures because a lot of your cash flow, 30% of your cash flow got to go servicing debt. When you pay that off, now you free up cash flow and now you're looking at your next level of growth and development. DDL in the last 2 years paid off almost all of their long-term debt. Now they have free cash flow to invest.
Lots of new projects.
Now they're undertaking a whole host of massive investment. They're bringing the World Trade Organization here, some 100 million US in investment. But how long did that process take? 15 years. How long do you take to lift a family out of? It takes a generation at least to lift a household out of poverty. The same thing for a company, the same thing for a country.
Some people won't realize
so for this country, we need an entire generation, another 30 years to bring down this capital, to build out the country, to build out the infrastructure so that enterprise could grow.
Joel, I've listened to everything that you've said there, and I think one of the takeaways that I'm getting is that any government that's going to be in place, and especially with the oil economy where you're having such enormous drawdowns on, it's always going to be challenged where you put the money, because politically for the sitting government, you're always going to get a criticism. Why don't you put some of the money my way? I looked at the budget here, right? At the budget speech, and I like a couple of things, a couple of the initiatives that they would have taken. I think one of the things that really stood out at me was the raising of the mortgage ceiling from 15 million to 20 million. That was something I thought was good. The other thing that we were quarreling about, the 1500 cc. So if you bring in a car that's just on the 1500 cc, it used to be that you pay about 1.2 million dollars in taxes. Now they're saying, hey, we put away that. All you got to pay now is a flat 800,000. That is the kind of things that people are really looking for. However, I must say that one of the things, and I agree with you, that you cannot just outlay a whole bunch of money into the people's hands without having some kind of sustainable way of continuing that. And so you have to put it in the infrastructure. But there are several other things in the budget that I really like. Like, for example, you know, the one, let me see one. They had here agriculture, not that one there. But Freddie, you did talk about how much money people are ending up in their hands.
Let's
in
talk about
social.
one of the measures you talk about here. I want to expound on one of it. The low income ceiling. You know what a low income ceiling mean? You know where the low income ceiling started from? It started from $8 million.
I remember that.
Right? I was working in the banking sector when this was introduced.
And NBS got it first. I think it was.
You know who introduced this? The vice president introduced this when he was president. He designed this model, and this is not a model that they just ask the banks, call up the banks and say, hey bankers, drop the low income interest rate to 6%. It didn't happen like that. They had to broker a deal with the bankers, and you know what was the deal? We want to push the housing sector, and we want low income families to be able, that is the objective, right? Growing prosperity not for the people, of course. So in order for that to happen, they would have waived the taxes earned on the taxes paid on the interest earned for those loans. So before this arrangement, housing loan interest was the same for commercial rates.
Yeah,
10%.
16. That's all kind of fancy
16 and
rates.
them sort of thing. So the government said, hey, we're gonna take off the taxes. You don't have to pay the taxes on the interest for these loans. So you now have an incentive to lower your interest rate to drive this program. Right? So the government had to give up revenue in the form of taxes. Now let me explain what this means. So this low income ceiling moved from 8 million now to more than double to 20 million. You know what that means for us? So the opposition leader said that there is nothing in this budget to take people out of poverty. That is a poverty reduction tool.
No, that's a major one.
You know how
you understand it.
A low income family could now access $20 million to build their
At
own
about
home.
68%, I think it is.
Right. Now, when that property, when they get their title and the ownership of that property, the value becomes part of their net worth. So the value, how they use that value, how they leverage that value. Freddie was telling me just before we start how property value where he's living gone up, how much a land selling for $30 million. So when you get a bill, imagine you building a 20 million house where property prices are appreciating. You know what those people could do? Those people could decide to flip the house and the land and make 3 times the money and build a $10 or $15 million home, and they still got money in the bank. That's one thing they could do. Or they could leverage the value of that property, borrow against it, use it as equity to start a business. That is a poverty reduction. Joel, that is just one measure, you know.
Joel, but do you know if someone is out there listening to you and they belong to a political party, they will throw questions at you. Within the 5 years between a government elected and the next election, you have to get hundreds of thousands in a case like more populated countries, millions of people. Now, I've listened to you, and I think your analysis is very scholarly and academic. That this thing don't come like
overnight.
This thing happen, but that's the problem with democracy. That's the problem, that when someone listen to Joel Bhagwandin saying these things, I'm talking about politicians, listening to Joel Bhagwandin saying these things, you have to go out there and an incumbent government have to go out there and provide for people who will have to vote and put them back. So in a debate, someone will say, why am I voting for a party that increase my public assistance by just 2,000? So at the end of the day, if you're going to be re-elected, you've got to provide people. It takes, I've always argued that if you have 15 companies helping a political party with resources, with finance, those 15 companies would not translate into 2 parliamentary seats. You need 5,000 votes for a seat in Guyana. There aren't 30,000 companies that financing a political party. So don't matter how much business people support a political party anywhere in the world, that political party is going to depend on millions of voters to be elected who are not wealthy. So my point is, there are going to be people who are saying, my vote will be determined by what you give me. And that's a real dilemma.
I'm glad.
And I think that's a point I wanted to make too.
Yeah.
It's always going to be a challenge for the
No.
for the
Hey, it's
government.
not a challenge. Let's examine that scenario practically. Let's look at it practically. First of all, there is provision in this budget. I did an interview on the same night with Prime Minister and several ministers, including Minister Dendi Prasad. There is provision in the budget to build a special home for the elderly who are abandoned, like in the US and so on, where people just
like in the Palms in Bhagwandin.
Yeah. So there is provision to build another facility where the government is going to provide for that type of situation, right? It's not the best of situation, but it's the reality within the society we live. So there is provision for that. Now, a pensioner, right, is a grandparent, grandmother, or grandfather for somebody. It is that you have to look at it from a household perspective. The pensioner, that grandparent, might be living by themselves or be living and being supported by the support system of their family. Now, while that pensioner is collecting their old age pension and being sustained, the budget has provided the opportunity for the new generation of the grandchildren of that pensioner to get a free education, to get a scholarship when they graduate.
No.
This is how we got to look at
what
it.
Freddie is saying there,
No, what
for
he's
the
saying-
norm, for the pensioner, and this is the thing here. We acknowledge that it's always going to be a dilemma for the sitting government or any government that goes in there. When you have all this cash, where do you put it? And you spoke about sustainability, but what does the government how does the government react when the pensioner who's just getting what $30,000 a month, 28,000, right? How does somebody know you getting all this money in and you're gonna come back in 2025? That, for me, I understand that the government has to do the responsible thing and exercise what you call responsibility in how they handle this. And we know that there's several measures in here. But what Freddie is just saying, you're always going to face, I think that is what I think he's saying, you're always going to face that criticism from the voters who believe that they should get more. You always hear that
and
all
that
the
is
time.
why
But you're right,
and that is why Owen Arthur lost the election in Barbados. That kind of argument of Joel is sound plausible.
Of course.
And Owen Arthur out in Barbados, who was doing quite well, it was quite popular, was taking that kind of route. And people were saying, fine, but we're getting this, and we're getting that, why should we vote for you? We want this and we want that. So at the end of the day, I think Guyana is a peculiar case. I don't think the ruling party has or will have any formidable opposition in 2025. It could come down the road years to come. But in other countries, that is going to be a stiff, that is going to be a massive subject in political debates. And it could cause government with those plausible policies to not be re-elected.
It's a difficult balance.
That's what I'm so going out in Barbados.
So let me add my perspective to that. You're both correct. And this is something that the government themselves know and acknowledge. This type of framework and this type of economic and political ideology in building a country, it may not yield the kind of political dividend that you're looking for.
I like that.
Because it comes at a cost. But what is the other option? There is always there is only two options. It's either this way or this way. So
That's correct.
What is the
there isn't the third way? And I think that's where there's some use for socialist economics. I don't think we should throw out socialist economics.
No, but Freddie, if you look, but you look at it here. Look, in Barbados, and that is what Joel is saying too, because there are two sides to the coin. In Blackbush Polder, where I have my family, there's a kid there about 17, 18.
There are more than two people there.
Yeah, in Yakasari. Yeah, that is the neighbor that did
man.
it. But look back at this here. They have the expansion of the part-time job program, right? This is a way of how the government is given, but it's not cash grants, but it's a way how they given. The girl is not qualified. She doesn't do anything, but she turns up and she helps the area of Blackbush Polder there, and she gets I think about $40,000 a month. Otherwise, they're not going to get. But there are many other programs like that. For example, you also have, and I'm glad that they have been able to do this. That $25,000 that each one of my kid is getting $25,000, whether you like it or not. That's something in their pocket. You also have the $75,000 to $85,000 in the tax threshold, your PAYE, as you talk about that. So at the end of the day, there are things that is happening, but like I've said, and I just wanted to drive home the point, it doesn't matter what you do. When you're the government, you're always going to, especially with a case where you have oil money now, you're always going to face the criticism. Well, you should have given me more of the money. That is what is going to happen. I just wanted to make that point. But Joel is also arguing, which is, from a government perspective, how do we really put this money so on a long term it comes or redounds to the benefit of all Guyana? And that is an issue that we have to deal with.
In addition to that, hold on, let's stick to the socialist thing, right? In addition to those measures that you highlight, Gildarie.
I'm glad there's some recognition that there's a socialist input in the budget.
So let's talk about the entire social framework. It is not only the pay, you see, and I know what you're doing, Freddie. You're doing it not you personally, but from the perspective of the critics, from the politician standpoint on the other spectrum. But when you look at the social framework, that is not the only social framework. The social component in this budget is $244 billion. $244 billion. That is over 30% of the entire budget. Now, how did I get that figure? The allocation in the health sector, $67.1 billion. That is a social investment to improve the health sector in several ways, to improve the invest in equipment and to build new modern hospital in other regions across the country, to improve health, the delivery of health care generally. That is a social service. Public safety is a social service, $58.6 billion. Education is a social service, $45.9 billion. Housing is also social, $72.2 billion. And there are a few others. So it is the social component in the budget is not only the pension and the cash grant. That is one aspect. That is social welfare that is transferred through direct cash transfers. But then there is also the broader social element in terms of healthcare, which is free, education, which is free, and the government has committed to deliver free education right up to the tertiary level. Public
But
security.
you don't think that was feasible in the budget? Free UG education, you don't think that was feasible?
It's gonna come.
But you don't think it could have come in this budget?
Not in this budget. We got to build out the other
I think
framework.
look, the other thing that
come.
I was told, I learned, somebody pointed out to me, and I didn't look at it that way. Right now, we're dependent on the Starbuck block, and while the government may not want to take a stance, that's an oil economy that we diverse in a sense, and that is the way that it should be. The thing is, you only have Starbuck block, which is creating so much spin-offs. Imagine you have 3 more Starbuck blocks of oil that's coming on. The kind of money that you talk
Joel,
about.
time is going, and I'd like you as a financial analyst, and I think you're a competent financial analyst, and that is why I read all your stuff. I was able to write a column on your stuff. I don't think you could leave this forum tonight without giving us your thoughts on the people who criticize the oil industry. Dr. Janet Bulkan, who lives in Canada, went to the OAS and asked the OAS to intervene to stop oil exploration in Guyana. Then there was a letter signed by around 30 persons, of which 20 live outside, that actually said fossil fuel industry is a threat to climate. Guyana should not go in that direction. How do you answer? I'd like to hear your answer to these critics that we have for 72 years never had a gold mine that could at least alleviate poverty, and we found it now. And look the criticism, Joel. How do you respond to that?
So Freddie, you're a political scientist by training. Every person, every group, every organization, every stakeholder have an agenda, have their own agenda, right? And if you do the research, and I have done it, there was some IEFA, some guy named Tom Sanzillo, criticizing this thing. I took this guy on from day one. This is also the reasons why Kaichonians don't like me, because I destroyed all of the people who they relied on to give credibility to their position, including, you know who, the guy you were talking, I don't want to call his name.
No. Once it's not libelous, people want to learn. There are thousands of people. Don't say anything libelous about him, but for the record of history. So, who are you talking about? Mr. Ram?
Yes.
I don't think Mr. Ram would mind you talking about him. Let the debate go on, Joe.
The Kaichon News labeled me the goon. The word they use is the goon.
The goon.
Because I take on all the people who come, and the people, including Melandi Janki and so on, when I took them on, I am too aggressive. So
don't let that deter you. Don't let that deter you, Joel.
They don't want to
get
to the debate.
You
right?
go on.
But
please don't let that deter you.
No, but I'm glad you raised, these people are hypocritical. These people are absolutely hypocritical. Tom Sanzillo don't write anymore. I see Christopher Ram stop right. Melandi Janki, who is pushing this agenda with the court to stop. When I did the research, in fact, a former minister pointed this thing out to me. I didn't know. The 1999 contract, production share production license under Janet, right. Melandi Janki, I could say this because I publish it and I send it to Melandi Janki. She never responded. When I hear back from she went on in December and did some international news, how the gas assurance feasible. That is why the government got to borrow. Hear what she's saying. The government got to borrow money because the gas assurance feasible. No bank could lend money to a project that is not feasible. It has to be feasible to us. So the fact that you're getting money to borrow, to finance this thing, the fact that investors are putting the money, it means it's feasible.
That is why we wanted you on this program.
Let's talk about
that. Is why.
Let's talk about it.
Keep your. Let's hear your responses to people like Janki and them.
Janki, she was on a mission, and when you do the analysis and you come down and you do, as we would say, you put 2 and 2 together and get how much? 4. Where we put two together, whatever you get,
not
whatever you
65.
want to get, right? She was either in her individual capacity or as part of a firm. She was doing work for ExxonMobil during that 1999 period. So you got to ask Janki from 1999.
Please be careful.
This is facts. It's out there on the internet. You gotta go and sue Google. You gotta go and sue everybody who published it, right? I'm quoting what is verifiable. Her name is on the document. Her name is on the document. Attention to her. So you gotta ask Janki, why is it from 1999 up until 2016 she never write a single article against ExxonMobil to stop their production? She was part of the process to help them in the exploration because she was paid. Now she is suing Exxon, and we have to ask, who is she suing Exxon on behalf, and what is she suing them for? And she's suing the government too. What are you suing the government for? You're suing them for money? You're suing them for some declaration? She is this labeled by Kaicho News as this big transparency advocate. And she is not transparent. She didn't tell the people of this country she was paid by Exxon and she was working for Exxon from since 1999 to 2015. And Exxon did not retain her or her firm's contract.
Joel,
and she went on a mission.
You
Hear me
have a
out.
big future. You have a big future
Hear me
in
out.
this country.
Hear me out. She can't tell this big transparency advocate, what are you suing government, the state, and Exxon for? You're suing them for money? If you're suing them for money, what you doing with the money? For your personal use? Or you gonna give? Or you gonna give the guy?
No. Joel, you have
I want to be the
a big
devil's.
future in politics.
I want to be the devil's advocate here.
I know about that part.
Had there been no
You'll
criticism,
get it.
had there been no criticisms of the oil sector, starting from when Kaicho News would have picked it up and whoever would have followed it afterwards, do you believe that the question I want to ask you, do you believe it has helped Guyanese to have an understanding of what this industry is all about, an industry that's so complex? Do you believe that it helped those criticisms?
Well, let's define criticism, Gildarie.
Me getting into my, politics.
Criticism is one thing.
Facts are another.
Facts is another. Constructive criticism is another. And being critical is another.
Thank you.
Okay? Propaganda also is a different. Misinformation is a different thing. So I don't see how that helped Guyanese. Now let me tell you, in terms of critical criticism, when the production sharing agreement was released to the public, you know who was the first person did an analysis and criticized it? Yours truly. I was writing for Newsroom at the time, and as soon as it came out, Bishop sent it to me, Joel, do an analysis on this thing and let's publish. I was the first, even before this government, when they were in opposition, I was the first to criticize it, to point out all the loopholes. I did a 10-page document on it. Right? I was the first to criticize it. But we have to understand now, coming into government, there are many other variables at play. Oil is not an ordinary sector. Oil, you have geopolitics involved, you have sanctity involved. Venezuela, and Kaicho News, they carry this thing. Venezuela, when Venezuela got sanctioned, Kaicho News did a story. What is the real reason why, Venezuela got sanctioned? And the reason being put out there by academics and observers and international observers is because of the fact they bullied Exxon. They bullied Exxon. They did exactly what Kaicho News is proposing to do: break the stability of contract. Exxon took them to court. Exxon lost the case. They just get must see $10 billion or something. Venezuela won, and so at that time, don't underestimate the influence Exxon has with the U.S. government. Well, and then sanctions started to come.
Well, the CEO became the Secretary of State.
So there's that geopolitical component. And then, apart from the geopolitics, at a country level, when investors, you're a businessman, Leonard, what is the first risk when you talking to investors? What is the first thing they're asking you for if you want to put money to invest in something? They want security. And you know what a security is tied to? It's tied to the political risk of the country. And that political risk is tied to the political cycle. If there is a change of government, will my investment be secure? And so if you want to attract investment in a country, we have been starved for investment. We've been starved for investment. For the past 30 years, we have not been able to attract investment, even though we had the fiscal incentives. So investment security is important to attract more investment, to stimulate more investment in the country. So that is the number one reason why the government should not attempt to renegotiate, at least. And I did a comprehensive piece. One media house, online media house, carried parts of it, where I even posited renegotiation. We should allow Exxon at least allow them to enjoy this for at least, give them 3 to 5 political cycles. Let it survive 3 to 5, minimum 3, maximum 5 political cycles. Then we could talk about renegotiation based on the resources we have.
Next week, the budget debate begins. Freddie Kissoon and Joel, I want to ask, what are some of the things that I know that you, Freddie, and I feel the same way too. I thought that they could have done a little more, but I understand the dynamics of why you can't just outlay a whole lot of cash. Little comfort for the folks like the pensioners and maybe the single moms. But what are some of the things, take away very quickly in closing, Joel, that you believe that you like about this budget and you don't like about it?
From my perspective, I'm very big on accelerating the development of the country because I understand what it means for the future. I have taken a conscious personal decision to stay in this country because I see a bright future.
Thank you.
But that bright future is hinged upon investing for the future, building the infrastructure, and I'm seeing the allocation in that regard to build out the infrastructure. There is also adequate allocation of resources in the social framework, health sector, education, giving more scholarship, overhauling the education sector. Then agriculture, there is big allocation here for the agriculture sector. When we speak of inflation, we got to talk about around rising food prices that I see the opposition is peddling. You got to increase production, food production. We are producing food right here. So if green's gone up, it means we got to produce more. There's a shortage. It means demand is high. So how do you bring down the price? Not by pumping more money at the consumer through cash transfer, but by increasing production so that the market could reach to equilibrium to stabilize prices. And that's how economics operate.
Thank you very much. I think we run out. Freddie?
Well, we've run out of time, but two dimensions I would like to point to. I believe, and this is philosophy now, this is not economics. I would say the budget is sensible, plausible, in the right direction. But I believe, and this is both philosophical and theoretical in the sense that I'm speaking as an academic now. I believe when you have vulnerable people in your country, the sick and elderly, pensioners, you should find money, to make their life sustainable. And in that respect, I would have liked to see an increase, because when you look at the population, for 75% under 45, you're not talking about a lot of money going into senior citizen pension. If you have a population that is 75% under 45, then if you increase senior citizen pension, you're not talking about a great outlay of money. If you look at statistically the people who need public assistance, it's not substantial, nowhere near substantial part of the population. I would have liked to see that 14,000 go to about 24,000. I do believe, when all is said and done about economic realities, the state has a sacred, and I like to emphasize the word sacred, the state has a sacred duty to protect the vulnerable in society.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, dear Freddie Kissoon, and of course to our guest, Joel Bhagwandin. Very interesting conversation. Very bright individual here. A very proud son of the soil, and we should look forward to more uh, interesting talks with Mr. Bhagwandin, because next week is when the debate starts on the different aspects of the budget, different sectors, different regions, and it's going to be this way it's fleshed out. And of course, we'd have to bring back Mr. Bhagwandin to let us take it a little more, let us see what exactly this is. As we move forward in this country, the debate, the kind of level of talks and dialogues that we'll have to have, it has to be centered on how do we improve this country, bring it to a level and a standard where everybody could have a good life. I think personally, when I looked at the budget and some of the measures, I would say it's very cautiously. I think it's solid, but like Freddie, I do believe I'm a little worried about those vulnerable folks out there, pensioners, and of course the single parents, and so. And I think we have to. The good thing about it is that I've seen the government in recent years, during the year, they would have announced measures as the demand and the circumstances would have been presenting themselves. So wherever you are, I hope that you would have been tickled by some of the things that we would have raised here tonight. Food for thought. These are the kind of conversations that we want to have and raise our levels, so we could be able to also probe our government or push them to do a little more, and of course push our opposition to push them to increase or improve our livelihoods in this country. That's what it's all about. Good dialogues. Thank you very much. I want to say good night. Thank you very much, co-host Freddie Kissoon, and of course to our guest Joel Bhagwandin. We're gonna have you back, sir. Good night, folks. Stay safe on the roadways if you are in the roadways. See you soon.